Welcome to Brand Sauce. I'm your host, Joe. Let's talk about marketing. Let's make it a little spicy. This is the first ever episode of my podcast. I'm recording this both for everyone who might be listening in the car or watching on YouTube, but I'm also recording live on TikTok. I'm here to talk about marketing. Where to start? How does marketing actually work? For us as people, as consumers, as people who see things over and over again. I keep going back to something that I talked about with a friend of mine who also works in marketing not too long ago, and he said, you have to talk to people like they're fucking dogs. And it was not directly related about marketing, but he was talking about trying to communicate with people, and he was just expressing some frustration over a very specific thing. And I've thought about that a lot. It's a graphic way to frame it up, but when you are trying to effectively communicate, you have to do it in such a straightforward, simple way. To have a message really connect with someone and have them internalize it, it needs to be specific, it needs to be simple, it needs to be relatable so that they can remember it. And that's a trap that I think a lot of young marketers maybe fall into, is they don't necessarily think about that specifically. They think about, how can I prove out what this brand or what this product is that I'm trying to communicate and sell to a person, without thinking, how does someone actually think and react? In the 15 plus years I've been working in marketing and studying marketing and getting a master's degree in marketing, there's a couple of books that I come back to over and over again that I think are crucial for anyone who is learning marketing to absorb and revisit time and time again. One of those is Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman. I don't have a physical copy here, so I'm not going to hold it up, but the other two are Contagious by Jonah Berger, and then How Brands Grow, Volumes 1 and 2. I took the dust covers off because I think they look a little bit nicer like this, but those are written by Byron Sharp and Jenny Romaniuk out of the Ehrenberg Bass Institute for Marketing in Australia. And what all of these books do, I think, when you combine them together, is give anyone, no matter what type of business they are trying to market in or what they're trying to communicate, a really simple framework for how do you frame up that message for a way. I think it gives people a very simple framework for understanding how do people think, and then how then do you communicate whatever your message is going to be, whether it's selling a product, offering a service, or trying to influence change in some sort of political or social level. How do you do it in a way where people are going to understand it and remember it so that they can act on it when the time is right? Human beings are not logical thinkers. And we're not fast thinkers either. There was a study that just came out just in December from Caltech, where some researchers tried to measure how quickly the human brain processes information. And the figure that they measured that at was 10 bits a second. That is not remotely as powerful as a solar-powered pocket calculator. We do not process information quickly. We are operating with essentially what are caveman brains that, yes, we are able to think and create amazing things, but the main part of our brain that just is operating 24/7 is not particularly powerful. And so going to that first book, Daniel Kahneman, Thinking Fast and Slow, what that book really dives into is how do people get through the day with that limited mental processing power that we have. If you've seen the film Moneyball or read the book by Michael Lewis, a lot of that book and what happened with the Oakland A's is about how people misunderstood what value in baseball players was available to them because of the errors in judgment that they made over and over again. And in the foreword to the book that Michael Lewis wrote about Daniel Kahneman, he said that after he published that book, people came to him over and over again and said, why don't you talk to the researcher who tried to put a framework around how people make those mental errors? And that's Daniel Kahneman, one of the founders of the study of behavioral economics. And what his book really gets into, what that field of study is all about, is the fact that our brains are processing a ton of information all the time. And as I said earlier, our brains are not very good at processing information quickly. So Thinking Fast and Slow, he talks about System 1 and System 2 thinking in that. That's just kind of his framework for trying to explain how the human brain works. And there is a mode that we can use our brains where we think very intently about a problem and we're putting all of our mental energy into it. So think about taking a math test where you're going through and trying to put all the figures together and putting all of your mental energy into it, versus when you're putting your socks on in the morning. You know what socks are, you know where they are, you know how to put them on. Your brain's just kind of on autopilot. And that book talks about how much of our day, even more so than we realize, our brain is kind of on autopilot and just working by associations that our brain has built out over time. And that idea that our brains are often working by association ties in really, really nicely with How Brands Grow Volumes 1 and 2, because it takes that science or that understanding of how the brain works and tries to put that into a framework for strategic communications for a brand or a company. And how do you work your way through those mental challenges that people have just because their brains don't process information that quickly. So How Brands Grow Volume 1 and 2 were published maybe 10 years ago now, and I feel like there was a very strong interest in that within specifically the marketing community because it is about marketing and branding. In the 10 or so years that I've been working in marketing since those books were published, it's been very interesting to interact and work with people who have either read those books and very much understand what they are trying to communicate, as well as those who are maybe not familiar with them at all. Both of these volumes of books is try to describe the ways that you can work within the limitations that the human brain has to process and remember and recall information. And what they do in the first book is scientifically go through and look at all different kinds of categories and analyze the way that marketing campaigns might actually help a category. One of the big things in the first books is talking about how the share of voice that a brand has. So that's literally basically how much money they spend on advertising. So that leads to share of voice. The brand that has the most share of voice, typically in any category, has the most share of the category. And the second book dives in a little bit more into how can we make a brand memorable. And a few of the things that they get into really go back to this idea of being consistent over time and being very relatable to the ways that people think. Because if we go back to Kahneman, knowing that we spend a lot of our time thinking through associations that our brain makes, these books are all about how do we help build and reinforce those different pathways that the brain has, so that when someone is in a situation where they might be thinking of your particular brand, you can easily recall them. One of my favorite examples of this, that's a very easy one for people to understand because they advertise so much, is referencing Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola, I think, has done a tremendous job of building mental associations for people throughout decades, literally decades of focused advertising and consistent advertising to build associations not with the brand itself, but to build pathways where people can think of Coke when they are doing different activities where you might want to have a soda. Whereas someone who's maybe, fresh out of school and might think about a marketing campaign, they might make a marketing campaign for Coke where it tastes great, it has a lovely color, let's ignore all the other chemicals and stuff and how much sugar there is, but hey, it's just fun to drink and it tastes good. Whereas Coke, the brand, they're advertising, again, for 30 years. As long as I've been alive and aware of advertising, Coca-Cola has been advertising about how much fun it is to have a Coke when you're at the movies, when you're watching sports, when you're at the ballpark, when you're having a barbecue, or when you're cooking at home, when you're at a concert, when it's the holidays. And by trying to anchor Coke not to these different benefits or features of the product itself, but instead saying, here are all the different occasions where Coke might be good, what Coke is doing is helping to simplify those pathways in the brain so that when you are one of those situations where a Coke might be available and a Coke might be enjoyable, it's easy for you to think of. And this is the power of really effective and consistent branding for either a large brand like Coca-Cola or a smaller brand that might be started up by just, a guy in his basement, or someone who is trying to start up, some type of a social media influencing account about good makeup techniques, or someone starting a gym or something like that. Building out a marketing campaign that is not about you, that is not about your product, but instead is very closely connected to the types of occasions that people might find themselves in when they think of a brand, is the way that a brand can most effectively anchor itself within someone's conscious and give themselves the best chance of success when that person is thinking about purchasing from that category. Because when we're building out strategic communications for any type of product, service, or anything else, we need to understand that people are not going to think about that brand or that category first and foremost. When they're going to the store, they're not going to think about, I want to have a soda because soda tastes delicious. Which soda tastes the most delicious? I think it's Coke, so they're going to buy Coke. Instead, they think about, I'm having some friends over, or I'm going to have a barbecue, or I'm going on a road trip. What are the things that might be nice for those specific occasions that I'm going to find myself in? And how do I make that the best version of whatever that experience can be? We literally could spend an entire series of podcasts talking about all the different ways that these books describe how to build out those associations for people, no matter what category you're talking about or what you're trying to accomplish. Throughout both of the volumes of How Brands Grow, they emphasize over and over again how crucial it is to not have brand communications be brand focused but consumer focused. And what I mean by that is what they mean by that is by not talking about the attributes of your product or service, but instead trying to be laser focused on what is important to the person that you are trying to reach and how your brand or product might fit into their life. Because that's the first part of building a strong mental pathway so that someone can easily recall you when they're in a situation where they might want to be buying a product or they might have a need for a product. And the other one that they emphasize quite a bit throughout the books is the importance of consistency over time. Because it's not enough to see that message once or twice. You need to see that 10 times, 20 times, 30 times, not over the course of a week, but over the course of months before that advertising is going to start really kind of gripping in the brains of the people you are trying to reach for them to be able to easily recall you and think of you when they're in a situation to buy. Recently, I just posted a video on TikTok and Instagram and YouTube about Nike and how in the last couple of years under the leadership of John Donahue, they had some initial success with their strategy of pulling a lot of their products off of shelves of retail partners like DSW Shoes and Foot Locker and putting more inventory either in their own physical stores or on Nike.com. And what I talk about in that video, this is very much related to this, is what that did for them, which is maybe counter to what they wanted to have happen, is yes, they are able to bring people in and capture more of their data and get more percentage of the profit off of every pair of shoes sold, but because there are still so many people who do like shopping in physical stores and will go to physical stores to buy sneakers, even if it's not Nike, what they missed out on and what has been happening to them over time, aside from maybe just a loss of cool factor for a few things that I'm probably not the most qualified person to talk about in terms of like what's cool and what's not, but by not having as much physical inventory on shelves where people buy sneakers and think to go to buy shoes, and giving an opportunity for other brands to take up more of that space. Seeing those brands over and over again when you're walking by a shoe store in the mall, or if you're going in to buy a new pair of sneakers because you want something clean for starting a new job or going out on a first date, or you or your kid is starting school and you want to have something that just looks really fresh and clean. Whereas there used to be maybe half the inventory being Nikes, if that gets reduced down to 10%, that's more place for New Balance, for Vans, for Adidas, for Reebok, for all these other competing brands to take up physical space in those stores. And what that does is that helps reinforce those pathways for those brands with your same consumers over time. And while, maybe the first time they might go to Nike.com or they might pick one of the pairs that's still there on Nike, what you have allowed the competition to do is to present themselves in an additional touch point and build those mental pathways. And over time, what's going to happen is it's going to be easier for people to think of a different brand when they're thinking about shoes. Again, thinking category first, not product first. It's going to be easier for those people who have gone to those stores and not found Nikes, but seen a lot of other footwear brands to think of the Nike competitors instead of Nike itself. And all this is just to reinforce how crucial it is to think about how people are thinking about your category and how your brand fits in, instead of thinking about, we're just going to put our brand message out there, we're going to put our name out there, and that's going to be enough. The last book that I always emphasize for, especially for younger marketers who are looking to learn, is I talk about Contagious by Jonah Berger. This is a great book. Jonah Berger studied at Wharton and studied under Chip and Dan Heath, who wrote a book called Made to Stick, which is a very similar format to Contagious. Jonah Berger talks about how are some of the ways that we can show up in ways that are instantly memorable and attention-grabbing, because it's so crucial to cut through all of the noise that exists to show up to people and have them pay attention to what you're saying so that they can have that chance to internalize that message and build out those internal pathways. A couple of examples that I love from the book. There was one in the Olympics several years ago, and now this is just proving the point. I don't remember the name of the casino who did this stunt, but some online casino paid a guy to put on a tutu and put their name on his shirt and sneak into the Olympics, into one of the diving pools, and jump off the diving board. And a lot of people talked about this stunt but no one talked about the brand and no one remembered the brand. I don't remember the brand when I'm telling the story, and I've read the book. But the point that Jonah Berger was making there is that it's not enough to be big and audacious. You still have to be relevant to who you are and to what is going to be important and noticeable to people. So some of the examples that he shares are things that are big and audacious. Another one is anyone who was on YouTube maybe 15 years ago would remember Blend Tech. So think of an industrial grade blender beyond like a KitchenAid. How do you make that stand out and make people notice? And what Blend Tech did, their $400 blender, premium price at the time, I don't know what they cost now, instead of showing all the different smoothies you can make or how effectively you can chop through, some cucumber or something like that, they would take everyday objects. Like they would take an iPhone or an iPad when that was still a pretty big deal, or an iPod, and put it in the blender and show how effectively this blender could chop that up. By showing in so many different videos how effectively their blender worked on things that weren't food, they were effectively demonstrating that it could be very effective on food that you would use. But because they did such an audacious style of demonstration, it was guaranteed to get people's attention and have them actually tune in and watch. Similarly, there's another example. For anyone who's a native of Philadelphia, lives in Philadelphia, or has visited Philadelphia, you know that cheesesteak is a big deal. And one of the first stories he tells in the book is about this high-end steak restaurant called Barclay Prime, and how they knew that they had a good product, they had a good menu, they knew the quality of the food was good, but they didn't have just that little it factor that they felt was going to be able to kind of break through the noise, especially the local PR, and get people to notice what they were doing. So what they did is, knowing that obviously we're in Philadelphia, everyone has strong affinity for, Geno's or Pat's cheesesteaks. What if we take that humble staple of our city and instead turn it into something incredibly decadent? And what they did was they created, instead of, a $5 cheesesteak that you get from any one of the restaurants around Philly, they made a $100 version that had foie gras, that had lobster, that had gold leaf, had all of these really rich, incredible ingredients served to perfection, made to perfection. And they would serve it up with a half bottle of champagne. Now think about just how different that is from the typical types of things that people in that market would be used to. That is catnip for local press, and that is something that's going to capture people's attention, and especially as Instagram was starting to catch on in the 2010s, that's something that's very Instagrammable too. And so people are going to do your marketing for you in part by showing this thing that is so out of the ordinary, but still relatable, that people are going to notice that and remember that. Jonah has a lot of other great examples within that book to show how you can be effective with those touch points that you have and make sure that whatever you are doing is still going to help reinforce those pathways that people are building when they're thinking about the different occasions that they might go through on a day-to-day basis that will relate your brand or your product to what is going to be relevant to people. He doesn't say it in so many words, but I think it actually is a very nice pairing with Thinking Fast and Slow and with How Brands Grow. All these books that were written, 15-ish years ago and maybe within about 10 years of each other. I think they all tie together really nicely. If I was to leave you with anything in this first episode, I want you to remember that people are not good at thinking, and they're not logical about thinking. In order to help support whatever brand or product that you work on behalf of as a marketer, ask yourself over and over again, is this something that's related to what the person is going to be experiencing, and how does it tie in? Can we tell that message consistently over time and have it be repeatable over and over again? Is the marketing that we're doing going to help that person be able to easily remember us when they're in a situation where they might be looking to buy the category? We don't think logically, even though we think we do. So what can we do in support of a brand or support of a product to help make sure that we're making it as easy as possible for people to think of us? That's what I want you to think about when you're thinking about the next email campaign you're working on, or the next campaign that you're going to be outlining for whoever or whatever you happen to work on behalf of. Because at the end of the day, even though we think we're smart, we're not. And we got to talk to each other like we're fucking dogs. This has been Brand Sauce. Thanks so much for tuning in. You can find me on TikTok, if that still exists in the US, on Instagram and on YouTube. You can contact me at brandsauce.co. And if you have any ideas or any things you'd like me to talk about in a future episode, please send me an email at brandsaucepod@gmail.com. That's all one word, brandsaucepod@gmail.com. Thanks so much for listening. Keep it saucy out there.